The train came howling in from the east like a wounded thing, coughing black smoke into the empty sky. No one on the platform stirred much. The noon sun beat down hard, flattening the color from the boards beneath their boots. A few townsfolk lingered under the awning of the general store, hats pulled low, pretending not to look but stealing glances just the same. It wasn't every day a bride came through Dalton's crossing. Cassie Bellows stepped down from the train with her carpetbag clenched in both hands. The hem of her traveling dress, dark blue and dusted from the long ride, brushed against her boots as she moved. She was a tall woman, broad-shouldered, with hands that showed a lifetime of work. Her cheeks were round and flushed from the heat, and her brown hair had come undone from its pins. She blinked against the sun, heart hammering with something close to dread. She had written every letter carefully, speaking plainly about herself, about the farm she'd kept after her father died, the work she could do, the bread she could bake, the cows she could milk. She hadn't lied about her size or her strength. She didn't see reason to. Life demanded such things. But when she saw the man waiting for her, Mr. Ezra Cook, the one she had been promised to, she knew by the tightening of his mouth and the stiffening of his posture that something had curdled before a single word was spoken. He walked toward her, clean-shaven, narrow as a whippet, with a hat pulled low and a coat too fine for the dust. His gaze flicked up and down her form, and she felt it like the back of a hand across her face. He tipped his hat, but his voice was stiff. "Miss Bellows," he said. "Yes, sir," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "You'll find," he said, glancing sideways at the men gathered by the store, "that the arrangements have changed. A misunderstanding. A man has his expectations. I can't see us proceeding." Cassie stood there as if rooted. She felt her hands clamped tighter around the carpetbag. The crowd behind him was growing bolder now, murmuring, some chuckling low in their throats. Cassie's cheeks burned hotter than the sun. "I came all this way," she said, her voice cracking against the dry wind. Ezra shifted his weight, boots scraping the platform. "You'll be provided lodging for the night. After that, you'll have to make other arrangements." He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving her there like a dog turned out from its master's porch. The station master, a thin old man with a broom in his hand, shuffled forward. His face was carved into permanent lines of disinterest, but even he looked faintly uncomfortable as he pointed her toward the widow Maddox's boarding house. Cassie moved as if through water, dragging her feet across the platform. She did not cry. She would not hear among the vultures. From the edge of the crowd, a figure leaned against the hitching post. A ranch hand, his face shadowed by his battered hat, watched the scene with a stillness that spoke louder than any jeer. His name was Eli Coulter, and he had seen the ugly way men could turn on something they didn't understand. He watched Cassie disappear up the street, the heavy fall of her boots raising little clouds of dust. Something twisted inside him, not pity, recognition, like calling to like. He tipped his hat lower and pushed off the post, his mind already working in ways he hadn't allowed in years. The sun blazed merciless overhead. The town swallowed the girl whole. And Eli Coulter followed. The boarding house sat at the far end of town, past the broken fence and the stand of half-dead cottonwoods. Widow Maddox met Cassie at the door, a severe woman with iron-gray hair and a long apron stiff with flour. She barely said 2 words before showing her up the narrow stairs to a room that smelled of old soap and loneliness. Cassie laid the carpetbag at the foot of the iron-framed bed and sat down hard beside it. The springs groaned beneath her weight. She stared at the warped mirror nailed above the wash basin, at the reflection of a woman grown raw and shapeless under strange eyes. For a long while she sat there, fingers knotted in her lap, the sounds of the town leaking through the window like something distant and cruel. Downstairs, Widow Maddox kneaded bread at the counter, slamming the dough with a violence that spoke volumes. Word traveled fast in a place like Dalton's Crossing. Already the widow knew. Already the whole town knew. Cassie ate her supper in silence at the long table, avoiding the sideways glances of the other boarders, minors passing through, a schoolmarm without a position, a boy too young to be called a man and too old to be coddled. They didn't say much, but she could feel them thinking it. The mail-order bride no one wanted. Afterward, she climbed the stairs again and sat by the window as the sky folded into darkness. Across the street, the saloon lanterns flared up, casting long drunken shadows against the dirt. Laughter floated up, sharp and mean, the way it always sounded when it wasn't meant for you. Cassie thought about the little farm she had left behind, the apple trees that had bent low with fruit last fall, the creek that sang all through the spring melt. She thought about her father, coughing blood into a handkerchief the winter he died, and the way the debt collector's boots had sounded on the front steps not a week later. There had been no choice, no future for a woman alone. She closed her eyes against the ache swelling in her throat. The knock at the door came just before midnight, a low scrape against the wood. Cassie started, heart lurching against her ribs. For a moment she thought maybe it was Ezra, come to offer some half-hearted apology. But when she opened the door, it was not the thin, fine man she found. It was the ranch hand. Eli Coulter stood in the narrow hallway, hat in hand, dark hair curling damp at the edges from the night heat. He was tall, but not the kind of tall that bent away from his own body. He wore his size like a weapon, casual and patient. His shirt was open at the throat, the skin beneath browned and rough from the sun. His eyes, steady and gray as a coming storm, fixed on her face. "I ain't here to bother you," he said, voice low and even. "Name, Eli Coulter. Work at the Red Mesa Ranch north of here. Just figured you ought to know you ain't done wrong, no matter what that fancy bastard said." Cassie swallowed. She hadn't realized how badly she needed to hear even a scrap of kindness until it was laid in front of her. "I thank you," she managed, her voice scraping out small. Eli shifted his weight, boots creaking against the floorboards. "They'll forget about it in a week. Folks here, they ain't got long memories, not for much that matters." He tipped his hat then, almost awkwardly, and started to turn away. Something in Cassie's chest cracked open. "Wait," she said, before she could think better of it. He stopped, one shoulder leaning into the dim light of the hallway. "I ain't got much," she said. "No real place to go, I don't suppose." She trailed off, shame scalding her tongue. Eli nodded, slow and deliberate. "Mr. Red Mesa's always looking for good hands. Woman who knows work when she sees it could do worse. Ain't much pay, but it's honest." He dug into his pocket and drew out a scrap of paper. "You come up there tomorrow, ask for me, I'll see you on." Cassie took the paper, fingers brushing his for the briefest second. His hand was rough, calloused. A man's hand made for the land, not for parlors or fine talk. He tipped his head again and walked down the narrow stairs, his shadow swallowed by the night. Cassie closed the door, the scrap of paper pressed against her heart. Hope, thin and sharp as a needle, pierced through the thick fog of her shame. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the window, watching the stars scrape their cold paths across the sky, clutching that slip of paper like a lifeline. In the morning, she would go north, toward something that might still be hers. The road to Red Mesa Ranch was rough, little more than a scar through the scrubland. Cassie walked it with her carpetbag slung over one shoulder, boots raising little ghosts of dust with every step. By noon, the sun sat heavy overhead, hammering her down to half her size, sweat slicking her back and forehead. The land opened up the farther she went. Flat stretches of prairie gave way to low rises, mesquite and sage clawing at the cracked earth. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk keened, a sound so sharp it seemed to split the heat itself. When she crested a low ridge, she saw it. Red Mesa Ranch sprawled across the valley like a wounded beast, all weathered barns, battered fences, and cattle that looked like black smudges against the ochre ground. It was not the grand spread some men boasted of in letters. It was hungry land, hard land, and the people who worked it would be the same. Cassie squared her shoulders and went on. A pair of ranch hands were working the corral when she arrived, hammering new planks into place where the cattle had busted through. They looked up at her approach, squinting into the sun. Neither spoke, but one gave a sharp whistle that carried across the yard. Eli emerged from the main barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes caught hers immediately, and something unspoken passed between them, a kind of recognition, a silent vow. He crossed the yard in a few long strides. "Figured you had grit," he said, nodding toward her carpetbag. "Come on, I'll get you set up." He led her to the bunkhouse, a low, sprawling building that smelled of wood smoke, leather, and sweat. There were a handful of beds lined up inside, half of them empty. A few other ranch hands lounged in the shade outside, cards in their hands, eyes flicking toward Cassie with a mixture of curiosity and something harder to name. "This'll be yours," Eli said, pointing to a corner bed. "Ain't fancy, but it's dry. You'll work with the cook and the wranglers. Lot of ground to cover, lot of mouths to feed." Cassie nodded, grateful beyond words. She stowed her carpetbag under the bed and met his eyes. "I can work," she said simply. He smiled then, a real smile that broke across his face like sunrise after a long night. "I don't doubt it," he said. In the days that followed, Cassie learned the rhythm of the ranch. Up before first light, stoking the cook stove until it roared like a beast, kneading bread with arms that ached from the effort, hauling buckets from the well, mending torn gear with stitches so tight and fast that the men stopped teasing and started bringing her their things without a word. At first there were mutters. Men weren't used to a woman taking up space among them, especially not one who met their stares head-on. A few tried their luck with rough jokes or sly grins, but Cassie met them with a cold, steady silence that stripped the humor from their mouths. She was not here to be wanted, she was here to survive. Only Eli treated her like something whole. He showed her how to patch the fences, how to feel for the soft give of rotten wood, how to spot the telltale tilt of a post that would need resetting before the first rains. He taught her to saddle a horse without spooking it, to cut the wild thorns from a cow's hide without drawing blood. Sometimes they worked side by side in the lowering dusk, sweat and dirt painting their skin, the silence between them comfortable and deep. Cassie caught herself watching him when he thought she wasn't looking, the way his hands moved, deft and sure, the low rumble of his voice when he called out to the cattle, the way he stood with his weight balanced easy, ready for anything. She told herself it was foolishness. Dreaming was for girls, not for women who had been thrown away like spoiled meat. Still, when he passed her the water bucket or brushed past her in the tight quarters of the barn, the heat that flushed through her had nothing to do with the sun. Life at Red Mesa was not easy. It was a constant battle against the land, the weather, the cattle, and sometimes even the men who worked it. But for the first time in months, maybe years, Cassie felt the stubborn spark of herself reignite. Late one night, when the wind tore across the plains and rattled the bunkhouse windows, Eli sat beside her by the dying fire. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked, voice so low it barely stirred the air. Cassie stared into the flames, the orange light carving hollows into her face. "I already left everything once," she said. "Ain't much left to run to." Eli nodded, understanding threading between them. "You ain't what they said you were," he murmured. "You're more." Cassie said nothing, but the words sank deep into the wounded parts of her, places even she had forgotten how to touch. Outside, the wind screamed like a soul gone mad. Inside, something quiet and dangerous began to grow. The summer hardened, days grew crueler, beating the land into cracked submission. Water grew scarce and tempers shorter. Red Mesa Ranch tightened like a fist, every man and woman braced against the season's breaking. Cassie rose before the sun and worked until her hands were raw, but it wasn't the heat or the hunger that turned the ranch restless. It was the undercurrent of change, a whisper that Red Mesa's owner, old Thaddeus Price, was dying. Price hadn't been seen outside the main house in weeks. Word slipped through the bunkhouse that he had no heir, that he owed more to the bank than to God, and when he passed, the land would scatter like ashes. Men began to wonder where they might land next, which ranch might take them. The uneasy feeling festered like rot under a bandage. Cassie stayed close to her work. She did not ask questions, did not press against the rising tide of fear. She knew better than to think survival ever came without a cost. Eli, too, wore the change like a second skin. He grew quieter, sharper-eyed. The two of them spoke less, but when they did, the words cut deeper, anchored heavier. It was after a dust storm tore through the ranch, stripping the paint from the walls, driving cattle near mad, that the first real trouble found them. A group of men from town rode up the dirt track, their horses lathered and mean. Ezra Cook rode at the head, a black hat pulled low and a sly smile on his thin mouth. Beside him, two men Cassie recognized vaguely from the saloon, the kind who took what they wanted and paid in bruises and broken teeth. They dismounted without asking, and strode into the yard like they already owned the place. Eli was at the fence line when he saw them coming. He dropped his hammer and crossed the yard fast, boots kicking up dirt. Cassie stood at the cookhouse door, wiping her hands on a rag, heart thudding a brutal rhythm against her ribs. Ezra saw her and smiled wider, slow and deliberate. "Well, look what the wind blew in," he drawled, tipping his hat mockingly. "Thought you shriveled up and died, sweetheart." Cassie said nothing. She let the silence stand between them like a blade. Eli came up beside her, solid and immovable. "You got business here, cook?" he asked, voice low enough to shake the air. Ezra spread his hands, mock innocent. "Just paying respects. Heard Price is on his deathbed. Figured the land be up for grabs soon. Might stake my claim early." "This land's not yours," Eli said. Ezra's eyes flicked to Cassie, then back to Eli, something ugly blooming on his face. "Maybe not yet." One of Ezra's men spat into the dust. Tension snapped through the yard like a drawn wire. Ranch hands came out from the bunkhouse, standing in a loose, wary half-circle. No one moved for a long breath. Eli stepped forward, between Cassie and the men. "You best turn around," he said, deadly calm. Ezra laughed, a sharp, grating sound. But he saw the way Eli stood, weight balanced, fists loose at his sides. He saw the glint in Cassie's eyes, hard and unbroken, and he counted the tired, desperate faces of the ranch hands gathering behind them. Ezra Cook was a coward at heart. He pulled his horse around with a savage yank and spat a curse into the dust. "This ain't over," he called as he rode off. Cassie watched them disappear into the heat shimmer. Her hands trembled at her sides, but she did not let it show. Eli turned to her then, his face carved with something fierce and tender all at once. "You're safe here," he said. Cassie shook her head. "Ain't no such thing." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, recognizing the truth in her words. The next few days passed like a held breath. Price died quietly in his bed, and word came down from the banker in Santa Fe that the land was to be sold off to pay the debts. The men grumbled and packed their few belongings, heading off to find work elsewhere. Some drifted south toward cattle drives, others east to the railroad camps. Cassie stayed, Eli stayed. The ranch emptied around them, the buildings hollowing like old bones. One night, when the moon hung sick and yellow over the fields, Eli found Cassie by the broken corral. "You could leave," he said. "No one'd blame you." Cassie turned to him, her face unreadable in the half-light. "I ain't spent my whole life clawing my way up just to be chased off again," she said. A slow smile tugged at the corner of Eli's mouth. "Then maybe we stay," he said, "together." The word hung between them, dangerous and real. Cassie stepped closer. She could smell the dust and leather on him, the sweat and iron of a man who worked and bled for what he had. She reached out and took his hand, rough palm against rough palm. In that grip was a promise. Not of easy days, not of love whispered over flowered beds, but of standing shoulder to shoulder against whatever came next. Together, the first true thing either of them had touched in a long, long time. Morning came heavy and low, the sky bruised with an oncoming storm. Cassie woke to the scent of rain still miles off, the kind of smell that promised both salvation and ruin. She rolled from the narrow bunk, pulled on her boots, and stepped outside into a world that seemed to be holding its breath. The ranch was almost unrecognizable now, hollow and silent, but for the creak of an unhinged shutter, the restless shuffle of cattle left behind. Yet she and Eli moved through it like it was still whole, patching what could be patched, salvaging what could be saved. By midday, the storm broke open. Rain came in great fists, hammering the earth until the dust turned to sucking mud. Cassie and Eli worked side by side in the downpour, roping in the cattle that hadn't bolted, hauling what supplies they could into the old storehouse. Their clothes plastered to their skin, faces streaked with water and grit. It wasn't enough. By nightfall, the flash floods came, roaring down from the mesas, swallowing the low trails and gullies. Cassie stood in the barn doorway, watching the water rise, the edges of her dress soaked through. Fear throbbed low in her gut, a deep, primitive thing. Eli came up behind her, rested a hand on her shoulder. "We'll weather it," he said. Cassie nodded, but even she could see the way the land fought them, wanted to scour them off its back. In the small hours, when the wind screamed like a living thing and the earth itself seemed to shift under their feet, Cassie thought about the road that had brought her here, about the train platform, about Ezra Cook's curled lip and the taste of humiliation so thick she could barely swallow it. And she thought about Eli, standing steady against the ruin, choosing to stay when so many others had run. When morning peeled back the clouds, the world was new and raw. Mud lay thick as blood across the fields, fences torn up, the last cattle scattered like broken promises. But they were alive. They dug out what they could, rebuilt what they couldn't, days blurred into weeks. Their hands grew rougher, their bodies leaner. At night, they fell into the same narrow bed, too tired for anything but the comfort of shared breath. The land did not give easily, but it gave. Cassie planted beans along the southern slope where the water had cut new furrows. Eli built a smokehouse from the broken boards of the bunkhouse. A few cows survived, stubborn things, and calves were born under Cassie's hands, slick and bawling and full of life. Word drifted back from town that Ezra Cook had gone bust, tried to gamble his way into a fortune and lost everything instead. Last anyone saw, he was heading east, a broken man with nothing in his pockets but debts and regrets. Cassie felt no triumph at the news. Some things weren't worth carrying. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the half-mendied house, Cassie stared out across the rough field where green shoots now dared to break through the mud. "You ever think about what might have been?" she asked, voice low. Eli tilted his chair back, hat pulled low over his eyes. "No use thinking on it," he said. "World's full of roads not taken. I'm glad for the one that led me here." Cassie smiled, small and private, and looked down at her calloused hands resting in her lap. They were not delicate hands. They bore the story of every mile she had walked, every heartbreak she had swallowed, every battle she had fought to stay standing. And they were good hands, strong hands. Eli reached over and covered them with his own. The sun slipped behind the mesa, setting the sky on fire. The world they had clawed out of dust and sorrow settled around them, imperfect and bruised but fiercely, stubbornly alive. Cassie Bellows, once unwanted, once left standing alone on a hot and dusty platform, had found her place. Not because someone had chosen her, because she had chosen herself. And in that hard, defiant choosing, she had found a man who saw her not as something to be reshaped or pitied, but as something necessary, something vital. Together, they built their world from the wreckage. And when the winds howled again, and they would stand side by side against it. Unmoving, unbroken, home,